Have you guys ever had coffee with peanut butter in it? Not like actual peanut butter, but like peanut butter flavoring in it. It's really good. I also used to do this thing where I would make like a protein shake that had coffee in it and peanut butter, and it was so good. Anyway, welcome back everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're gonna be talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, and they actually managed to lose in the second round after having the best record in the entire league this year to a Miami Heat team that I gotta give all the credit in the world to the Heat. There were certainly points in the series in which Milwaukee could have ended up winning it, but the Heat played outstanding. They simply outcoached the Bucks at times, and that's something that we're going to talk about in this video. And it sets up probably the most interesting offseason in the entire league in Milwaukee as it relates to Giannis, as it relates to the rest of the roster. It's going to be really, really interesting to see what this team is going to do moving forward, and that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day with the exception of the next week or so. It's going to be a little bit weird. And also leaving a like rating is a great way to let me know that you're enjoying the content, and it helps out the video a ton as well. With that said, let's go and get started. Okay, so first, I think we got to talk about the head coaching situation in Milwaukee. Mike Budenholzer has been a really nice breath of fresh air in Milwaukee since he's been there. They fired Jason Kidd, and immediately Mike Budenholzer created a team that has had one of the best records in the league the last 2 years. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? To go from basically the same roster and then have Coach Bud come in and create such a better team in the regular season, at least. But he's definitely had some playoff struggles, and Eric Spoelstra was just a better coach in this series. But even though I think the Bucks are going to evaluate the head coaching position, I don't think that they're going to fire Budenholzer. Like, they could. It's definitely a possibility, but I don't think that after the amount of regular season success that they've had over the last couple of seasons, and the fact that, the Giannis free agency stuff is looming, I don't think you bring in a new guy in that scenario. And I understand that we've seen plenty of coaches in the past win 50 games and get fired. Mark Jackson, George Karl, Dwayne Casey had a run of success in Toronto before they fired him, and obviously Nick Nurse has turned into one of the best coaches in the league afterwards. But I'm not on the fire Coach Budenholzer train right now. Was it a great postseason for him? No. But I don't think it's an accident that this team improved so much when you went from Jason Kidd to Budenholzer, and the fact that they've won so many games the past 2 years. So I'm not quite there yet, but if you are, I think it makes total sense. Okay, so now let's talk about what everybody wants to talk about, and it's the offseason for this team. And the good news for them is they're going to be able to bring back the core of this group for next year. They're going to be losing a few guys like Kyle Korver and Pat Connaughton that they're going to be able to re-sign. But outside of that, the core of this group, Giannis, obviously, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, George Hill, Eric Bledsoe, all those guys will be returning next season. And that's good, but also they don't have the cap space flexibility, and trade-wise, they really don't have a ton of options for improvement either in terms of improving the roster around Giannis, because some of their first-round picks are tied up. Obviously, they lost Malcolm Brogdon last year. They don't have a ton of assets here, and honestly, the players that are on their roster work really well for what they want to do, but I don't think they have a ton of value to other teams. So for right now, this is pretty much the group that they're going to have to go with. But in theory, as long as they bring back the same group mostly next year, they should be a 60-win team again, depending on how many games the season is next year. And yeah, playoff success is still a question mark, but they've still got a really good group around Giannis, even though there are some teams around the league that he could potentially go to in free agency that offer him a better situation in terms of complementary options and stars around him. That doesn't mean that the Bucks are a bad situation for Giannis. There's just a couple of potential super team options that we're going to talk about later in the video. Because of course now we got to talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I think the misconception about Giannis's free agency situation is that it really begins in the summer or the offseason of 2021. That's not true. The Bucks this offseason can offer Giannis a supermax extension worth $250 million. Over the lifetime of the deal, it's worth $250 million for Giannis Antetokounmpo. This is a player that came in as a relatively unknown, middle of the first round pick, has turned himself into a likely back-to-back MVP, and to have that amount of money on the table and have the opportunity to return to a situation in Milwaukee that, despite the limited playoff success, has been very, very good to Giannis, especially the last 2 years in terms of regular season success. They have good complementary options. They're going to be able to continue to bring back guys year after year. For him to turn down that extension that is worth that much money and is in a situation that looks as good as Milwaukee will be for the next couple of years is a huge red flag. Absolutely huge. The free agency with Giannis does not begin in 2021. It begins the minute that he turns down the supermax extension, because when you look at everything that comes with this extension, the money, the long-term stability, the ability to come back to a team that in theory should be a championship contender, just had some rough postseasons. If he turns that down, all of a sudden things change really quickly in Milwaukee. Now that's assuming that all the salary cap stuff is still the same. We don't know how the league suspension is going to affect the salary cap stuff, but that is the number. It's over $250 million over the lifetime of the deal for Giannis. So that's step one this offseason for the Bucks, is you offer that extension. And if he turns it down, there are two different options here. One, you can wait until the summer of 2021 and hope that he re-signs, or two, you can start looking for trades for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Let's talk about the first option first, because in general, this is what happens in these types of situations. Players will wait until the offseason. They won't sign the extension. Teams will keep the player on the roster, especially when they're at the MVP level that Giannis is at. It's not like this is Paul George or something that, the Pacers are going to trade away, or something like that, where it's a really good player, but they just want to make sure they're not losing the value in free agency. Generally, these types of MVP level players, they get to free agency and they figure it out then. And if that's what Giannis wants to do, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not going to come back to the Bucks, but everything that we know about him as a player and everything we've heard about him to this point is that he wants to return to Milwaukee. And if he turns down that extension and wants to get to the summer of 2021, I think the tide is starting to shift a little bit, and that's terrifying if you're a Bucks fan. Now, to be fair, that money that can be offered in the extension will still be there for Giannis in the offseason of 2021 if he wants to wait to that point. But again, it's a weird situation, because it's not like this is LeBron in Miami or Cleveland where the roster is clearly declining. It's not like this is an Anthony Davis situation where they're just kind of struggling to make the playoffs every year. This is a team that has a core that they can bring back year after year that should be just as good a couple years from now as it is right now. And it's a team that has had one of the best records in the league over the last 2 years. So for him to turn down that money and that situation would be unprecedented, really. So what about the other option here? Well, they could certainly look for a trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo if they start to get the feeling that it's a real possibility that he leaves in the summer of 2021, which would be a shift in what we've heard to this point. To this point, it seems like Giannis is coming back. But if that starts to shift, they could explore some trade options. And there are a couple of teams out there with plenty of assets, teams like the Warriors, teams like the Thunder, teams like the Pelicans. But the problem in those situations is that, of course, he's still going to be a free agent in the summer of 2021, so they'd have to either negotiate a deal beforehand or they'd have to go through the same free agency situation. And as a result, even though it's interesting and it's crazy to think of trade machine situations for Giannis, I find it unlikely. Teams just don't trade away MVP level players like Giannis Antetokounmpo, even with the free agency situation being what it is. It doesn't happen. So what I would anticipate happening is either he signs the extension and none of this matters, or he signs a shorter extension and then revisits free agency a little bit further down the road, or he goes into free agency in the summer of 2021 and it becomes an absolute circus. There are multiple teams like the Mavericks, the Raptors, and the Heat that appear to be the front runners, with the Raptors and the Heat kind of being at the top of the list right now. They can offer some really, really interesting situations to Giannis. The Raptors will have a ton of cap space. The Heat will have a ton of cap space. The Mavs will be able to offer a max, along with the ability to play with Luka and Porzingis and some other complementary options that they have there. There are teams that are going to be, waiting around, ready to bring Giannis into a situation that is more favorable to winning a championship than Milwaukee. Even a team like the Warriors, they would have to facilitate a sign and trade. They've got a great situation as well. And that's really terrifying if you're Milwaukee. This is a summer that a lot of teams have been waiting for, and for the opportunity to bring in Giannis, and with an early playoff exit, I think this is the best case scenario for those other teams. If you guys have watched videos that I've made in the past about Giannis, I've been consistently saying that I don't think he's leaving. I don't know how you turn down that much money coming from, the situation that he came from, being a middling first-round pick, turning into a two-time MVP, and being on a team as good as Milwaukee's been in the regular season. I think it's unlikely that he leaves. But this early playoff exit changes all those things. It can really make someone think, man, am I ever actually going to win a championship with this team? Because last year, you make the conference finals. You're a couple games away from the finals. That's a huge deal. But this year, to be going backwards is a huge, huge deal. Now, the only other situation here is if for some reason Giannis comes out and is like, you know what, go ahead and trade me. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm requesting a trade. That seems incredibly unlikely given how this free agency situation has been handled to this point. But if he does, then of course they would definitely look to trade him before his free agency. But ultimately, He's probably not going to sign the extension. It's probably going to come down to 2021. I still think that he's staying at this point, but it's going to be way, way up in the air by the time we get to 2021. Because it's still possible, right? Like, it's still possible that, you know, they're much better in the postseason next year and they win a championship, and then at that point he's not leaving, right? So they still have a whole nother year, whether he signs the extension or not, to do something in the postseason, assuming they don't trade him, which I don't think they will. But still, it's going to be a really, really interesting situation to monitor and to watch. I don't think a trade is likely, but 2021 free agency is going to be absolutely wild. And for me, I can't wait, of course. And yeah, there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.